Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, May 8th, 2025. And boy, do we have things to talk about. Because just as I was sitting down to record the news and views, I was going to talk about two stories. The story that Google just announced that they're in for supporting the construction of 3 nuclear reactors to power the AI revolution that everyone says is coming. And I also wanted to talk a bit about the hostilities that have broken out between India and Pakistan. However, just as I was sitting down to do that, the radio announced that the conclave had ended and a pope had been elected. So I have just spent the last 45 minutes to an hour, about that, watching the reports coming out of Rome, and then, of course, the emergence of the new pope and various announcements and so on that he made before giving the traditional papal blessing on the loggia in the Vatican. And while surprises galore, the new pope is Robert Francis Cardinal Prevost, an American pope. And interestingly enough, he's chosen the name Leo, so that will make him Leo the 14th, and we'll be talking a bit about that in a minute. Now, it's always hazardous to try and guess what all the symbolisms and message sendings of new popes are. I was wildly wrong with Francis, because you recall back when he was elected, I opined on the late George Ann Hughes' show that it looked to me like he would be a caretaker pope while they figure out where to go, and he turned out to be anything but. Leo the 14th, I don't think, is a caretaker pope. He looks to be in fairly good health and a younger man, and therefore I think this could be a long pontificate, barring any unfortunate sudden deaths as we had under John Paul I. But there's a lot here to dissect. And I suspect the first thing in the back of the minds of the cardinals was clearly that the election of Mr. Trump is signaling a complete makeover of the global order. And therefore, I suspect that they want to have some sort of leverage or influence via an American pope over what happens with the emerging global order. Now, I am not ruling out, by the way, the possibility that there was influence at work to get Cardinal Prevost elected coming from this country, because after all, it's a fairly well-known thing now that the resignation of Benedict XVI, the election of Francis, were also brought about by some pretty hefty behind-the-scenes covert American influence emanating from the Obama White House, the Bush White House, and people of the ilk of George Soros and so on. So we're looking at, I think, the strong possibility that there was some behind-the-scenes influence. Cardinal Prevost was and is no traditionalist in the sense that many of you, especially on this website and who listen to these vid chats, are. If you're Roman Catholic, we have quite a few Roman Catholic listeners on our website. Many of them, if not most of them, are rather traditional. In other words, they want to see the ability for the Latin Mass and so on and so forth to come back into major usage. Well, Prevost is no traditionalist. However, he's sending messages, and they're very interesting. When he appeared on the balcony at St. Peter's, he was wearing the traditional red mozzetta. That's that little red cape that popes traditionally wear when they come out to give their first blessing. He was wearing that, which is interesting. And let's note some other things about this man. First of all, he's a member of the Augustinian order. Now, when I was listening, the Roman Catholic commentators were saying, well, he wants to reach out and build bridges, and he himself mentioned that he wants to build bridges, open arms to everyone, and so on. One of the commentators mentioned that he wants to build bridges with the Eastern Church. Well, I guarantee you that someone steeped in Augustinian theology is not really going to be able to build many bridges to the Eastern Church, because we just don't think that way. And those of you who've read my tome will understand why. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been many who are willing to sell out orthodoxy in the past for the sake of unity, just as there are many who've been willing to sell out Roman Catholicism in the past for the sake of unity. But insofar as that plays a factor in his ecumenical outreach, it's not going to help him, at least as far as the Eastern churches are concerned. The other thing to note about him was that he was head of the dicastery for bishops. This means that he was in a very powerful position to appoint diocesan ordinaries around the world, and for that matter, auxiliary bishops and so on, coadjutors and so on, throughout the Roman Catholic Church. And that's a very powerful position, and he exercised it more or less in a way that gave comfort and aid, so to speak, as far as I can tell, to most of the modernist agendas, but not always. But he was coming out of that, and his election as Pope means, I suspect, a rather significant effort is going to characterize his pontificate to make careful appointments, particularly as diocesan ordinary bishops. So this is going to be a very interesting thing to watch his appointments. During his opening remarks, I also noted that he made several references to Francis, Pope Francis, which, of course, is to be expected, but there were no references to anybody else. There was no reference to Benedict XVI, to the two John Pauls, to Paul VI. So, in other words, that to me indicates, or is at least a little subtle message, that he's going to carry on more or less, again, in the Bergoglian tradition. But again, as I say, I was wildly wrong with Pope Francis, and I could be wildly wrong about Leo XIV. Now, let's talk about Leo XIV, the choice of the name Leo, because to me this is the most significant message he may be sending. Not to mention the fact that he restored the red mozzetta, the red cape, to his use. You recall that Francis ditched that tradition as well. Well, Leo XIV, by doing that, took a deliberate step back into the traditional ceremonial of Roman Catholicism, which is interesting because choosing the name Leo makes him the 14th Pope to have chosen that name. His predecessor with that name was Leo XIII. Raffaele Luigi Cardinal Pecci, I believe, was his secular name. And if you go look up Leo XIII, Leo XIII was the successor, the first successor to Pius IX. And if you know anything at all about Roman Catholic Church history, it was under Pius IX that the dogma of papal infallibility was indeed made a dogma. So Leo XIII was the first pope to succeed Pius IX after that dogma had been declared and proclaimed necessary to the faith at the First Vatican Council. Leo XIII also did a number of other things. He began the practice of establishment of the Institute for Religious Operations, in other words, the Vatican Bank, which eventually, of course, grew much larger than it was under Leo XIII. And Leo XIII also reaffirmed Catholic pronouncements against Freemasonry, and also codified a great deal of Roman Catholic social teaching. So in other words, Leo XIII was, from a certain point of view, in other words, the post-schism papal authority point of view, Leo XIII was certainly a quote-unquote traditionalist. Okay? So I strongly suspect that Leo XIV is signaling something very significant by choosing that name. He's hearkening back to the previous Pope, Leo XIII, in the aftermath of the proclamation of papal infallibility. Now, to me, this is a large message. This, to me, says, along with everything else that I'm trying to digest, so to speak, on the fly, because literally the new Pope just quit speaking before I decided to start recording this News and Views. So I'm kind of thinking out loud here with you. But in choosing the name Leo XIV, I suspect that what Cardinal Prevost is signaling is that he is going to use the full measure of papal authority, perhaps in this effort to build bridges to continue the Bergoglian legacy, but I would not be at all surprised if he were to attempt to use it also in reasserting some of the traditional Roman Catholic practices that have been in abeyance since Vatican II. Time will tell. The second thing that I suspect he's going to use that that claimed papal authority is in promotion of some sort of globalist agenda. So in other words, he's either a response to Trump and the mood of not only America, but pretty much of all of the West. He's a response to the growing populism and the desire to move back to traditional culture and tradition. He's either a response to that, or he has been influenced to be elected behind the scenes precisely by America and some of the European powers. We will see. We will see. Certainly no one was expecting, and least of all me, was expecting the election of a pope from the United States. Rest assured that move is going to be having them burning the midnight oil in the Kremlin, and how to do this. I fully expect that one of the first things that we're going to see happen is some sort of meeting between this new pope and the Patriarch of Moscow, and perhaps between this new pope and some of the other patriarchates of the East, not just Eastern Orthodox patriarchates, but perhaps some of the Copts, the Armenians, and so on and so forth. I suspect we're going to see a kind of revivification of the type of diplomacy, kind of shuttle diplomacy that John Paul II became famous for. Time will tell. But for the moment, these are my first thoughts. And the other final thing, the reason I want to mention the bridge building that he mentioned in his opening remarks, this current new pope was also the head of the dicastery for the Eastern churches. In other words, he was kind of the head man within the Curia for relationships not only with Eastern Orthodoxy, but with the Copts and the Armenian churches and so on and so forth. In other words, all those churches of the East that are not in communion with Rome. Those are, I think, primarily what we're going to see. The bridge building, I suspect, is going to be interpreted by many people that he's going to continue the Bergoglian efforts vis-a-vis the blessings of, same-sex unions and all that. He might, but I'm reading a different message here. I think he will try to continue some of the Bergoglian initiatives, but time will tell if my reading of this Pope on the diplomatic stage is correct. If he is in good health, as he appears to be, this could be a long pontificate. So time will tell if I'm right in my guesses. I'm not doing too well with my papal predictions after Francis, but time will tell. I was off in many respects too with Benedict the 16th. So take that for a large grain of salt. But that's it for my news and views today. Now I want to mention one final thing. We are on for tomorrow's 2:00 vid chat. I am not hearing any news about possibility of severe weather or anything like that. So we are going to have our vid chat, but please remember I've been having some technical problems. I'm planning to be in there a little early, but to start at the usual time. So get your questions and comments in no later than 10 o'clock this evening, U.S. Central Time. And remember, one set of questions and comments, limit them to one page, please, per member. That's it for today's news and views. Habemus Papam is the Latin expression. We have a Pope Leo XIV. So let's watch this guy very carefully, and certainly, as most of you, I was, praying that this conclave would elect a person that could, quite literally, I was praying for the election of a person that would begin the process of unwinding 1,000 years of papal claims and doctrines and reverse the effects of their schism with the Orthodox Church. But who knows? Maybe we just started down that road with the election of this Pope. Time will tell. Anyway, that's it for today's news and views. We'll see you on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.